Hello and welcome to the PMO Virtual Summit, everyone. We have a wonderful guest here today with us, Randy Cox. Randy, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here with us, Randy. We're going to be talking about the TOC PMO. No, not the Table of Contents PMO, but the Theory of Constraints PMO. And I promise you, this is such a unique take and perspective on PMO. Is fresh for me. I can say that for sure. And I can tell you that through and after this conversation with Randy, you will be inspired to reimagine and rethink the role of the PMO. Before I hand it off to Randy, though, I'd love to go ahead and tell all of you a bit about him. Randy Cox is a project management and productivity expert with experience managing high-profile projects, programs, and portfolios for a well-known professional sports team, large investment companies, the VA, and one of the largest academic medical groups in the country. He is a consultant, coach, trainer, podcaster, and writer. His online courses, social media links, and content can all be found on his website, www.randycox.tv. Randy, great to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Welcome, everybody. I am going to give you a unique approach here. This is something that I have put together over many, many years. I've been in this project portfolio space since 2001. And I've seen it from a variety of angles, and I'm just as interested in project management as I am in process improvement and time management, because I feel like you have to have all three of those to really get stuff done. And so I've studied all of the major project management approaches, and at the same time, I've been studying the process improvement approaches like Lean Six Sigma, which you've probably all heard of, but Theory of Constraints is my favorite of the three. I've actually been a Lean consultant. I haven't been a consultant with Six Sigma, but Theory of Constraints is by far my favorite now. And so now I've kind of been connecting some dots between this body of knowledge and the Theory of Constraints, which I will get to here in a minute, and all of this project portfolio information and knowledge that I have and experience, and kind of melding those together in a Venn diagram into what I think is my vision of how a PMO should work. And so hopefully we expand your mindset a little bit today in the material that I cover. And you come out of here thinking, gosh, I never thought of it that way. And I'm going to give you, a bunch of new information, and I'll give you some stories along the way to kind of try to cement it home. And then I'm also going to have some challenge questions along the way to kind of make it, so you can ask yourself, boy, I really haven't thought of it that way. What if I did it that way? What if I did think of it that way? What if I did reimagine or reposition myself to be able to do that? And so hopefully you come away with a new mindset and some new skills. Okay, so here is the very first thing that you see here. There we go. This is my first slide. It just basically shows the overall agenda. These timeframes are rough. You can see I'm just going to spend a few minutes on the opening, a few minutes kind of summarizing. I'm going to spend most of my time in the actual body of the presentation. And so this is at 10,000 feet level. This is kind of what we're going to talk about. So the way that I'm going to frame this discussion is we have to first adopt this Theory of Constraints mindset, which I'll explain. And then we have to be able to apply that at the project level. And then once we can apply that at the project level, then we can apply it across projects at the portfolio level. And that is when we get dangerous. And that's when really the whole PMO can be transformed. But we really have to have those two layers as kind of the foundation before we can get to that. So that's kind of how the presentation is going to go. Before I go too much further, let me just give you a quick Reader's Digest version of what TOC is and where that comes from. So TOC stands for Theory of Constraints, and this is it's kind of a remarkable story. It starts with an Israeli physicist who is absolutely brilliant. And passed away. His name was Eliyahu Goldratt. He passed away a few years ago, and he switched from being a physicist to being a management consultant, which is not a likely leap, right? And he came at this field from a totally different standpoint. He didn't come at it from the social sciences, psychology, from organizational behaviors, like those kind of that general approach, that vector is kind of how a lot of the management theory has come about. He came at it from just the hard sciences, and he came up with some basic fundamental premises, and then he built upon those, and he excuse me, and he created more and more like higher and higher level solutions as he went along. So excuse me, he started with the manufacturing and the distribution world. And then he came up with some basic insights there. He came up with some revolutionary ideas, put them in a well-known book, and then he went to engineering. Then he went to sales and marketing. Then he just kept going lifetime, and he would do a bunch of research. He would come up with some brand new insights, and then he would write a book, and just had an amazing career and left behind this massive body of knowledge. It takes years to get through it. So the theory of constraints is kind of this umbrella term for this body of knowledge, which is across the entire, business organization spectrum. And my wife and I actually consult using the theory of constraints in the government space, and that was actually unique. So that's a story for another day, though. But that's where this comes from. So we say TOC, we're just meaning the theory of constraints, which is this big body of knowledge. Okay. So at the ground level, we've gone 30,000 feet, 10,000 feet. At ground level, this is what we're going to cover when we talk about this TOC mindset. We're going to identify the system constraint, and that's where the theory of constraints comes from. We're going to maximize the throughput of that critical resource that we've identified, and then we're going to calibrate and support. So I'm going to walk through how to do all of this, and like I said, just at the theory level, and then I'm going to walk through at the project level, and then once we do that, then we can talk about how does that apply across the PMO level. And hopefully your mind is expanding as we go along. So let's just get into the main content here. Here's the first idea. We have to identify the system constraint. Now, Dr. Goldratt's work started with this notion that every system has a constraint. There is a bottleneck somewhere, and that the system itself can only go as fast as that constraint allows. And he was thinking about it systemically, not about it in individual nodes. So this seems like a very simple idea, and we all go, okay, I got it. I got to know what bottlenecks are, know what constraints are. So I've been there. I get it. But my encouragement to you is to just think through this and think through the implications of this, because as Dr. Goldratt did not take this quickly and move on, he actually kind of layered it and then layered it and layered it, came up with some pretty profound insights. So let's start with this first example here. This is the ABCDE example, we call it, for obvious reasons. And this is a very simple model, very simple depiction of a system, a very simple linear system. Something starts at A, passed off to B, which then goes to C, and so on. Most of our systems are not this simple. Most of them, there has some kind of branching, and there's maybe emerging, or there's like parallel tracks or whatever. But this demonstrates the point, this simple model. One of the things Dr. Goldratt learned or taught us from physics is try to make the models as simple as possible that could demonstrate the point. So the very first idea here is, before we get into identifying the constraint, it's, do you know the system? Have you identified the flow of your system? Now, one of the reasons why I started studying process improvement stuff as a project manager is because I realized, just like you have, that my project there is a system inside of my project, and there's a natural flow to the work. Now, my background is in IT projects. I manage large IT projects, high profile. So let's say, for example, you have to analyze what the customer wants before that analyst can then hand the work off to a developer, and the developer actually builds whatever they want. Hopefully it's exactly what they want, right? And then the developer tests it and hands it off to the tester, and then the tester tests it, and then maybe goes to the users for user acceptance tests, and then it goes, maybe it's ready for deployment, it goes to the configuration manager. So we all have these kind of flows in our system, whether it's construction project or product development, whatever it is. First thing we have to do is we have to understand, do we know the flow? Have we diagrammed out the flow of the work? And do we know where there's handoff points? And is it go from one person? Does one person kind of carry the baton all the way through? Or does it go from A and then it's handed off to another role, which does B, and then B gives it to another role, another person, it goes to C, and so on. So I don't want to belabor this. Most of us have got maybe some swim lane diagrams or however we've documented this. But I have consulted with several states where everybody in the room, performs a certain transaction, or they perform a certain service for citizens. And when we ask them to diagram this out for us, or we try to diagram while they're talking to us, they can't do it, or they can do it they think they know a few pieces of it, and somebody else thinks they know, and they contradict each other. And I've seen that over and over again. What we've often found is that people know maybe one or two steps upstream of them, and they know what they do, and then they know who they pass it off to, maybe one or two steps down, but they don't know all the way from the beginning to the end. They just know kind of their piece with maybe a little bit of a window like this. So this is a super useful exercise, not only as from the PMO standpoint, the project manager standpoint, but for the frontline worker to know this is the flow of our project. It has to go from here to here to here to here, all the way. So like I said, I don't want to belabor that, but that is a very important point. So step one is, do you know the flow? Have you mapped it out? Okay. And then do you know where the decisions and where the handoff points are? And then once you've done that, then you can see I've got these little white numbers below each one of these nodes. So imagine that this is an assembly line of some kind, and the numbers represent the number of widgets that they can get done in a day, in a week, whatever. Let's just say a day, okay? So A can get 15 units done in a day, B can get 11, C can get 8, and so on. So in this scenario, C is the constraint. And so C, that system right there, that A, B, C, D, E system, if I were to ask you how many widgets can that system get through in a day, the answer is 8. And if you want to just figure that out, you could take some pennies and have like 5 little stations and do it. I won't do it here, but basically that system can only go as fast as its slowest member, as its constraint, which is C, which is 8. And so oftentimes what we do is we try to improve upstream, or we try to improve downstream. We try to improve everything at the same time, to be honest. And what Dr. Goldratt taught us is that could actually make things worse. If you improve things upstream, it could be building up the pile of work in front of the constraint and making more and more pressure on the constraint. And if you improve something downstream, people may not even know, because you're still only getting 8 units through. So for example, if we could make B go from 11 to 13, but C can still only do 8 units a day, even though B has now gone from, say, 11 to 13. Same thing if we get E to go up from 9 to 12, nobody would really know, because that system is still only producing 8 units. So this is one of the foundational insights that Dr. Goldratt started to work with. And started to teach us that we needed to think systemically. And the first thing is to make sure you understand the flow. And then the second thing is to make sure in that flow you identify where's my constraint. And generally, in my world, in the tech world that I work in, oftentimes it's the most technical. It's like, say, the Java developer, for example, in my assembly line. It would not be the business analyst. It would not be the tester. It would not be the configuration manager. It would be like the Java developer. Usually, like in an emergency room, it's often the doctor. It's not necessarily the front desk. It's not necessarily the nurse, right? So that's a second piece that you have to first understand the flow, then you understand the constraint. And then the third thing is you put your improvement efforts on the constraint. You don't worry so much about upstream, you don't worry about downstream, because that's not necessarily going to improve the throughput of the overall system. You worry about how can I improve C in this example? So let me give you a little example from my day-to-day life here. This was not too long ago. This was only a few days ago. So I'm sitting in McDonald's. It wasn't this actual one, but it was just like this. You've probably seen this where they have two full lanes to order and two full boards with menus and everything. And then it merges into one, and then you go and give your money, and then you get your food, right? So we've probably all been in one of these. I was sitting in one of these trying to get breakfast, and it was way backed up. The cars were backed up, beyond, we couldn't even order. We were like 3 or 4 cars before you could even order. So all this investment that they had made in building out a second, window wasn't doing them a whole lot of good, because the constraint in this system was they weren't giving the food out very fast. And so if I were, say, a process improvement person, and I could come along and I say, look, I could get you from 47 seconds to ordering down to an average of 33 seconds to order. That wouldn't be that wouldn't really help them, obviously, because what they needed to get the food out faster. And every second that they could improve on how fast they could get the food out, that improves the flow of the overall system. But being able to order faster doesn't really help in this. And that just gives you an example of how that bottleneck is kind of the constraint of the system. And when you identify that, then you have this power that okay, that's where we focus. We don't have to be everywhere all at the same time and launching 100 Kaizen projects all at the same time, trying to improve the entire thing with little pockets of improvement projects. We can now take a step back, look at the entire system, and go and laser focus, bang, that's our constraint. That's where we should put our attention. And when you do that, you improve the throughput of the overall system, okay? So here's my first challenge question for you. When was the last time you saw your role in the PMO as identifying constraints? Now, the reason I started this off with a picture of an airport with a big air traffic control tower right in the middle, I'm going to come back to that theme, because that's the metaphor. That's the big metaphor that I think of. When I think of the PMO, I think of air traffic control. You've got this incredibly smart, talented, well-trained pilots out there and co-pilots out there, each flying their own plane. Each plane has its own agenda. It has its own itinerary. It has its own passengers that they're responsible for. Highly professional people, and yet they don't have the ability to see the other planes that are flying in and keep track of it all. That's the air traffic controller's job, right? And to me, that is the PMO. That office has this ability to see across the different planes and to see the throughput of what's coming into the entire airport and make sure that's running smoothly. So if you think about that metaphor, and you think about let's say you have this special expertise and this special insight that hopefully I can convey some of that today. If you had that and you were now looking at individual projects inside of this portfolio that you're responsible for? What if you could now have a lens and you can go in and you could say, what's the flow of that system? What's the constraint of that system? And get to some of these other principles that I'm going to touch here in a second. But what if you could now have almost the eye of a consultant, a highly trained consultant, to say, you know what, I think we could improve this project over here by doing this, or I think we should focus over there. So that's part of this vision that I'm trying to convey. So that's challenge question number one. Let's go to the next piece. Once you have identified who in your system, which is inside of your project, who is the critical resource? Now, you could say the bottleneck, but I actually like to think of these people as the critical resource. They're generally, like I said, the most highly trained people in the team. Once you've identified that, now it's what can we do to make their lives better, right? What can we do to maximize the amount of work that they can get done, right? Because that improves the throughput of the entire system. And so I want to tell you a little story that demonstrates that. And we call this the blue light story. This actually comes from a guy named Kevin Fox. He's a theory constraints consultant. And he was familiar with it was like a car manufacturing facility. And you can imagine, like, there was the main floor, this huge big warehouse, and there was this catwalk up at the management layer, right? So there's the management offices, and they could walk out and they could look down over the entire plant. They could see everything that was going on. And there was a consultant there with a manager. And the question at hand, the reason they had brought the consultant in, is they felt like they were overburdened, they were out of room, and they actually had to go build possibly a whole other warehouse, a whole other facility, and that might have been, in another state. And it would have been a massive undertaking to do that, as you can imagine. So the consultant comes out there, standing on the catwalk, and was observing, right? And he looked at this one workstation that's kind of down in front, and he sees this little blue light, zzz, and it's the welder. And it's just a little bit of blue light, and then there's like a long time with no blue light. And what was happening is this welder's job was to go to this huge stack of bumpers that they had. He had to wheel them over. They were stacked up on this wheeled cart. He had to take one out. He had to peel the paper off, like the covering, the plastic, right? He had to mount it on his work area, and then he had to weld it onto the car, and then he had to basically take that cart, move it back, and get it ready for the next one. So this consultant was looking at it, and he takes out his watch, and he starts timing from the time that the guy gets the bumper to the time he welds, how much blue light was there, and then how much time was it after to clean up and then to go get the next one. And he figured, like, in a 10-minute period of time, there was only like a couple of seconds of blue light, of actual welding. And the rest of the time was like moving stuff around and getting things prepped and cleaned and all this. And they had one welder in this scenario. And they had this huge plant, but they had one guy doing this job. And so the consultant, being well-trained, said, okay, what you need to do is you need to get more blue light time, meaning your welder needs to weld. That's why you pay him quite a bit of money compared to a lot of these other workers in here. That's your highest, that's your highest value resource right there. Why don't we go get like a high school kid to basically go wheel these bumpers over and then take them off and put them on get them ready, get them, staged, and let the welder just weld, and then let that kid take him to the next one, or get him to the second kid, right? And basically just get this staged for the guy and just let him weld as much as he can. And let's offload some of this other stuff that's not really adding value, and let's let the guy do what he's really paid to do. So that term became like a blue light time, means like find what your people, once you find the constraint, find what they do best. What is the thing that they're really, like a Java developer is supposed to code, right? Not go to 100 meetings and a lot of other things. Like certainly there's other things, on their list, but the main reason you have a Java developer there, any kind of developer, is to write the code, right? And if we have them doing things that's not writing the code, they're not doing their blue light time. And so one of the things that we do in the theory of constraints is we identify what's the flow, what's the constraint, what's the blue light of that constraint. How do we get more blue light time from that person or from that team or whatever, right? And it could be something as simple as you got that person double booked and they're bad multitasking all over the place. Or like I said, they're doing a bunch of prep work they shouldn't have to do. I'll tell you one big thing is another TOC principle called a full kit. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen it where in the project plan, it goes from A and it goes to C. And when it goes from A to B, we don't give a clean handoff to B. We throw it over the wall at them and we say, there you go, and we're off to the next task. And B doesn't have everything they need to do the job, so we've just sent them on a scavenger hunt. And so the idea of a full kit is A talks to B and says, hey, B, what would you need? Would have every single thing you need to do that job. What's your checklist look like? Well, I would need this, right? Okay. And so then A now has a checklist, and A is not done until B says they're done. So in my teams, the analyst, the business analyst, has to get a full kit to the developer and to the tester at the same time. And the analyst can't just hand over the requirements and say, there you go. The analyst has to explain to both the tester and the developer at the same time. They both get to ask questions. And when they say, yeah, that's everything I need, I'm good to go, now they're done. So I think about this. I'm here in my home recording studio, and I've got a closet over there. In that closet, I've got probably like a lot of you have, I've got a closet just for my holiday stuff. Like I've got these plastic totes, I'm talking about. And so I've got like the totes with the red lid are for Christmas, and the totes with the black lid are for Halloween, and so on. So I got 3 totes over there that is all my Halloween stuff. So I could tell my 13-year-old, go get the decorations for Halloween out. And he knows what to do because it's all in there. Everything we have, like the cobwebs, the fog machine, the spiders, all that stuff is in those totes. Everything we need to do Halloween, the decorate for Halloween, is in those totes. And that tote becomes the full kit for Halloween, right? And so when it's all done, we pack it all up, we put it away, and now the next holiday comes, we go get those, and we're done. So that idea of full kitting, which we use it as a verb, to the critical resource is a key idea. So imagine that if we offload this stuff from the welder in this example, so that the welder doesn't have to do anything but weld or weld as much as possible. And when we give it to them, it's everything they need. It's all right there. Okay. So here's the next challenge question. Challenge question number 2. So when was the last time you saw your role in the PMO as trying to maximize the blue light time of those critical resources? What if you, again, from this air traffic control tower vantage point that you and I are privileged to have, what if you could see that resource is just getting clobbered, and this person is coming? Like I'll tell you a quick example. I had an architect that 5 analysts were coming to this architect. So let's say an analyst would come and say on Monday at like 10 a.m. I need you to work on this project. It's my number 1 priority. I really need your help, right? Okay, so he accepts it. Then literally that afternoon, another analyst would come in. I really need your help on this. This is my number 1 project. Can you help me? Sure. analyst 3, analyst 4. Over a period of 3 or 4 days, when our sprint was about to start, we would have this poor architect was clobbered, and every analyst was telling the truth. It was their number one priority. They were giving it to the guy that they needed their help on. They had no idea that person 2, 3, 4, and 5 had already been in there or was about to come in there asking for that same person's time. And this architect was just a really nice guy, and he just thought he was supposed to just take it. And I say that's wrong. I say it's our job. I say it's our job to know who the critical resource is and to make sure that we're not just clobbering them like that, that we sequence stuff just like we would with our own schedules, right? We wouldn't double, triple book ourselves. You walk in the morning, you look at Outlook or whatever your email program is, or your organization program, you look at your schedule, and if it's double, triple booked with appointments all at the same time, we don't allow that, right? We wouldn't put up with that in our own schedules. And yet we put up with that in project portfolios all the time. It happens inside of project plans, and it definitely happens across project plans. And the reason is because A doesn't know what B is doing. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And that is something we can do. We're in this unique position to know what the left hand is doing, to know what the right hand is doing, because we got both of their plans. They're coming to both of us. We're advising on both of them, right? So we're in this unique position to be able to see those types of things where we're collaborating the resource. Okay, we'll get a little bit more to that here in a minute. And then let's talk about this last piece. This is not all of the pieces that would go into a TOC PMO, but these are some of the highlights. Calibrate and support. So at some point, when you've diagrammed out the system and you've identified your constraint and you've got as much, you've offloaded and you've made sure that they're not double, triple booked, and you get the maximum amount of effort out of that constraint, at some point you have hit that is as fast as you can go, right? Unless you were to go and get another one of those people, or you maybe, there's things you can do, but for now, that's as fast as you can go. Like I live here in Salt Lake City, that's where I'm coming from. If we want to go back east, it's like a 4.5, 5 hour flight, right? Even if like there's absolute like perfect handoff point, like the flight comes in, they get everything off, they get all the people offloaded, they get the trash out, they get the food on, and we're out. It still takes a certain amount of time to get from point A to point B. And once we have optimized and optimized and optimized, and we've really have got it dialed in, then it's a matter for us to now start to calibrate our expectations around that is how long that project is going to take at its best. Now, should we build in buffers and all those things? Sure, right? But sometimes we have to let our stakeholders know, let our product owners know that this is everything we've done. And I know you would like it tomorrow, but this is how long it is going to take, right? So what I have up here is just a picture of what we've all seen when we go to the airport. We just know this is how long it's going to take for this particular flight. Now, will there be advances in the future where we don't have this speed limit of 600 miles an hour, whatever it is, right? Will we be able to get from this side of the country to that side of country faster than we can? Absolutely. You listen to what SpaceX is talking about. They're talking about anywhere in the world, in like a matter of hours, and it's amazing. So I really, really, really hope that I get to live long enough to see that day where we can just pop all over the globe. So yes, that day is coming. And yes, there will be things in the future that could probably make our projects, go faster, right? So we don't have to lose hope that this is the way it is forever, but we do have to kind of come back to reality of this is how it is today. Now, by the way, there are different kinds of constraints. there are physical constraints, like this is how long it takes us to fly from here to here. But there's also a policy constraint. The FAA has a policy of you can only fly this fast. The technology is there for the planes to go faster. So sometimes what you're dealing with and what you may see in the PMO in the office there is the physical constraint might not be there. The team might be able to run faster, but there might be a management decision, or there might be a policy decision, or there might be something in the way that's not allowing them to go as fast as they can. So this is one of those things when you start to kind of see the constraints of an organization, you start to be able to see that they have come in different flavors. This is another example where we, as the PMO, maybe we could say, you know what, Mr. and Mr. Product Owner, they could actually produce a little bit faster, but here's why. Because you've told them they can't do X, Y, and Z. But anyway, for today, the flights take as long as they take, right? So let's come back to reality of not the future, but they take the time that they take. Let's help everybody calibrate to those expectations. And let's make sure we support the system so that it can continue to perform at that level. Because inertia will take over, and if we're not vigilant, then that system will start to erode and go back, won't be as productive. So part of it is, this is another challenge question. When's the last time you saw your role having these crucial conversations with key stakeholders of this is as fast as we can go on this particular project, and here's why. Here's all of the things we've already done to optimize, and here's the decisions we've made, and here's the budget constraints, whatever. And so we need to, adjust our expectations to that, and we need to support that system so that they can fulfill at that level. Okay, so that's kind of three pieces of the TOC mindset. There are others, but let's talk about how would we apply that. That so far has kind of been a little bit theoretical. I've touched on a few things that were practical, but let's get really tactical, right? Let's roll up our sleeves. Okay, so I got it. I got the mindset, Randy. So now what do I do about it, right? I've been doing this at the PMO level. Again, let's talk about, we're talking about like there's this theory, and then how would we apply it at an individual project level? And then if you can get this project to apply it, and this project to apply it, and this project to apply it, and so on, now you can start to do it at a program level. So let's talk about the project level next. Then we'll talk about that. Okay, so at the project level, one great tool, even though I'm a huge fan of Gantt charts, I love them. I'm an Agile coach, okay? So I know I've got several Agile certifications. I love that as well. Love the burn up, burn down charts. But I still use Kanban boards. And if you want to just introduce a simple tool into your environment that would quickly show you where the bottlenecks are, I set up a Kanban board for every major step in the flow. So that's a physical way to accomplish what we talked about earlier. We had the A, B, C, D, E up there. It's a way to physically see the flow of the system and have everybody agree on, yes, these are the steps, these are the columns. And then I actually watch the work coming through. And, we used to do this with actual index cards or Post-it notes, but now most of us are, I'm managing team, not now, but most of my career I've been managing teams in like 3 or 4 time zones. So we mostly do this virtually now. But that is a fantastic tool because you could actually start to see the work come in and get stuck in a particular column. And when you start to see the work is backing up, and then it's just not making it its way out of this particular column, you've probably found your bottleneck, right? So that's one way that you can do this at a tactical level is if a particular project is struggling, you can encourage them to go with a Kanban board. We've already talked about this, full kitting. I like to think about the way a project should work is when you watch Olympic relay runners. So you've probably seen this, and I certainly don't have any kind of an Olympic body to be able to demonstrate this. I'm way out of shape. But you see the person is waiting with their hand out, right? Like we've got shown here. And then the person behind is just running full tilt. And then right before that person is ready to hand off, the person in front starts to just jog a little bit, right? So they're not going at a dead stop, and then they're like, grab it, and they take off and run. That's the way our projects should work. They rarely do, right? But if we could anticipate these handoff points ahead of time, and we can easily do that through a project schedule or through a Kanban board, and we make sure that the full kit is ready, and we do what TOC calls a resource buffer, which is basically going upstream and saying, now you realize you're going to be doing a handoff to Joe, right? Yeah. Okay, do you have a full kit checklist from Joe? Yeah. Okay, do we have everything in place, for that handoff? And so we're making sure that that's going to be a nice, smooth transition. So that's an ideal to shoot for me. And so here's another challenge question, number 4. So when was the last time you saw your role as kind of the track coach facilitating those handoffs, facilitating this process of like, okay, the whole relay team just keeps on moving, right? We don't have like this person that gets their job done and then they stop and then they throw it over the wall and then they're sending them on a scavenger hunt and they don't have everything they need. And so there's a lot of back and forth and then there's delays. And so now we have like every time there's a handoff, it's a huge potential for big delays in the schedule. It's a really big. I've got a free course that I will show you at the end, or I'll mention at the end, but that's one of the things I talk about. It's the first 4 things I look at when a project is in trouble. That's one of the 4. Do we not anticipate these handoffs well? So this is a simple depiction of another thing that we touched upon. This is a diagram of 2 paths through one project, right? So you have task 4.3 goes to 4.4, and I've got 4.4 in there twice, I just realized, sorry. So, but the yellow boxes here represent the same individual, and the orangish kind of boxes represent other people. So this is a scenario that I'm just trying to visually depict, where in this schedule, this one path, this task 4 path is anticipating it's going to go this way. And the task 5 pathway is also anticipating it's going to go a certain way. And look at that. There's task 4 and 5, task 4.4 and 5.3 need the same guy or gal at the same time. And so one of the things, we're not going to get into too much detail. One of the things in your project schedule, I'm sure you're resource leveling and making sure that's not just what's the critical path through the project, but it's the critical path after you've done resource leveling. So you get rid of this scenario. You make sure that, you stagger those things so you don't have the same person that needs to be in 2 or 3 places at once and at the same time, right? Maybe you can get somebody else to do task 5.3. So maybe you don't have two, one person has to be in the same place. Maybe you can have 2 different people. If it is the same person, then you're going to have to stagger, which means that project schedule might be a little different than what the critical path showed. And so that's where Dr. Goldreich called it the critical chain, to distinguish. The original critical path literature, anticipated this, but somehow some people just kind of forgot about that. So there's the folks who I really respect still understand you've got a critical path and then you've got to resource level it, right? I think most of us get that. But this is one of the things for us to look out for. We should not only make sure, when we review a schedule, we should be looking for this. This should be our radar. Our spidey senses should be going off, saying, alarm, alarm, alarm. You've got the same resource booked on 2 or 3 different tasks at the same time. That cannot physically happen. We need to adjust the schedule, and now it may take longer. Or now we're going to have to, we have to bring somebody else in or whatever, right? Imagine that scenario across multiple projects. That rarely happens. So here's challenge question number 5. So when was the last time you saw your role in the PMO as trying to just avoid this double, triple booking of our critical resources, and making sure that what each individual project manager, that number one, they're thinking about it just in their own project, making sure they're not double, triple booking people inside of their own plan. But then after they've done that, can you do that across plans, right? And this is something that we talked about a little bit too. Resource buffering is this handoff. So when you see a schedule and you see, okay, this is the critical path, right? We all follow that. We know how that works. And then we say, okay, let's make sure that whenever it goes from one resource to the next and the next resource to the next, that we put a little bit of a cushion in there, meaning we go upstream. We don't throw it over and expect them to be ready. We go upstream and make sure that we're giving advance notice to the person that, hey, this is coming. And we make sure that the person that's going to be doing the handoff has the full kit that we talked about. So there's this resource buffering, which is another term that comes from the Goldratt, or from Dr. Goldratt, which is when that's about to happen in your schedule, this little handoff point. There's ways to buffer that. There's ways to lubricate that transaction so that it can happen smoothly. So are we, as a PMO, thinking in those terms? Are we looking at the plans? Are we looking at what's being proposed and saying, okay, I see that there's a potential here. There's a handoff. There's a potential for a problem there. Let's talk about how would we do that? How would we put a little resource buffering in there? Okay. Now, that was about, we've talked about how this mindset, this theory. Then I've talked about it at the project level. I'm not going to go and belabor this point by point, but you get the idea. Once we've done it in each individual project, if you think about each task in your project plan having to all link together, and you're looking for those constraints, and you're making sure that you're not double booking, and you're making sure you got blue light time and all that we talked about. If you now take a step up and you think about, instead of each link being a task, what if each one was its own project? And now you have to do the exact same thing across projects. And that is for sure where the PMO can come in and add tremendous value. So like I said, even if you have a hotshot airline pilot who is the best in, the Navy or Air Force or whatever, they're the best at flying that individual plane that they could possibly be. They do not know about all the other planes that are out there. And so that is our role. We want to say thank you very much. We're glad that you're a hotshot. We're super glad that you're out there. But as well as you formed that project plan, and you don't have any of these, these problems in your plan. When I set your plan next to Sally's plan and next to Geetha's plan, guess what? We all of a sudden have conflicts. We do have the problems that we're talking about. Even though you work so hard, Mr. or Mrs. Project Manager, to avoid this, we still have this across the portfolio. We still have this across the program. We still have this when we stack the projects together. It's another level, but it's the exact same principles. It's the same thing we're looking for. That's the good news. It's like once you've got the spidey senses trained, then you can see it at the project level. Then you can also see it at the program level or at the project portfolio level. And I believe that is our role. I believe that's the vision to me of what a PMO really could be. So let me just summarize really quick with this little slide. I think that the PMO could see themselves as trainers. I think we could see ourselves as we are in this unique position. We have this specialized knowledge. A lot of times, you've seen this just like I have. A lot of times you have up and coming project managers. It may not be their first rodeo, but it might be their second or third or something. Or even more senior people who have managed a project, but they don't know about theory constraints. They don't even know what that means, right? They haven't thought in these terms. So there's an opportunity for us to have these insights and then to say, look, I know you're really, really good at running your project, but let me show you a couple of things. And to be able to teach and train and coach those project managers on some of these principles, as needed. So that's one way, one hat that we can put on that I don't really hear that talked about a lot. The middle one there is as air traffic control. We've talked about that multiple times. And then as resource optimizers, looking at the overall system, looking for these constraints, looking for these bottlenecks, making sure we've got blue light time, that sort of thing across projects. So these are three ways, three mindsets, three paradigms maybe, that this is how I envision it. Think of the value that we could add if we were not just seeing our role as maybe administrators, or maybe as paperwork, or maybe as just facilitators, or we run the meetings. I've been in, unfortunately, I've been inside, I've managed projects inside of PMOs where the PMO did not have a lofty vision of their role. And that's one of the reasons I'm really grateful for this summit, because I think that's what this summit is all about. This summit is about like raising our sights to like, good grief, what's possible if we adopt this, if we adopt the ideas that the other presenters are bringing up. What could we do? What's possible across a portfolio if it's run like this and like some of my colleagues? So I will leave you with that. And this is my website. We mentioned it early on. It's www.randycox.tv. I do online courses. I'm active on social media. I write. I have a podcast. I'm, out there. So I would invite you to visit me there, and hope to connect on LinkedIn or whatever, and say, yes, Randy, hey, I've tried whatever you talked about. I have a question, or by golly, it worked, and I'd love to hear from you.
Randy, thanks so much for that wonderful and insightful presentation. Really appreciate it.
That was my pleasure. Yeah.
All right, Randy. So now we're going to go ahead and get a bit into Q&A. Just get a couple of questions for you here. So I know we had a constraint of time with this presentation. So, and I'm sure that there are many other principles that are included within the theory of constraints. So any other principles from the theory of constraints that you would apply to PMOs?
There's one big one that I didn't touch on, is that the theory of constraints is really big on controlling what goes into work in process, or WIP. So if you think about a very simple 3-column Kanban board where there's to do, doing, and done, or often in tech world, it'd be like the backlog, work in process, and done. One of the big ideas is that you control what goes into WIP. And what most of us do is, unfortunately, we just think we're downstream. We just have to accept it. So you do have to let anybody can walk into the emergency room whenever they feel like it, whenever they need it, right? But you don't let them walk all the way back past the front desk, past the triage nurse, directly to the doctor, right? There is, like, anybody can walk into the lobby, anybody can get in the front door, but they control the working process from the front door to the doctor based on how many beds are back there, right? How many, offices are there for us to see people? And if somebody walks in with a gunshot wound, they're going straight back, right? But that kind of idea of controlling what projects we work on. There's another big idea there of taking our time and basically doing our due diligence up front and using the PMO as a screen of asking the question, should we even work on this in the first place? Versus being an order taker and saying, okay, whatever you want, we will run with, and my job is to simply make it happen as quickly as possible. I've seen several examples, probably you have too, where there's requests coming in that maybe we shouldn't work on, or maybe we shouldn't work on now. There's a whole triage process that's part of the theory of constraints that I would say it's another big idea here.
All right, that makes a lot of sense, Randy. Thank you so much for that. Randy, one final question before we close it out. What would you recommend a way to learn more about theory of constraints?
So two things. What most of us do is we have started with the book The Goal, which is a business novel, and it's a couple of decades old now, at least. And this is back when Dr. Goldratt started. It's the very first thing he did to introduce the theory of constraints to the world, and it was the only thing the world had for several years before he started to move to these other areas. And it's in a production. It's a novel written in this, but it's kind of this production distribution center, and it really helps you understand this at a deeper level. If you're an audiobook person like I am, right after you've read The Goal, there's an audiobook called Beyond the Goal on Audible, and I think it's like 4 or 6 hours long. What it is, it's a really long series of lectures by Dr. Goldratt himself, where he kind of walks through. This is later in his career when he's actually touched on all these different areas, and he walks through kind of the highlights reel of his mindset and the solution that he came up with in each area. And that would be, I would follow right on the heels of that. So there's The Goal. Then I'd probably listen to Beyond the Goal. And then he has a number of other books that are much smaller, but they specialize in these different areas. And that'd be a great way to learn.
Fantastic. Randy, thank you so much once again for being a part of the PMO Virtual Summit. Really appreciate you joining us all the way from Utah. And for all the audience and the viewers and listeners, I did want to make sure that you connect with Randy and take a look at randycox.tv, where you can find all the content that he produces, including all his contact information. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.